extension of Hunterdon County. For 15 years, she has been training Rutgers Master Gardener volunteers to take a systematic approach to handling helpline inquiries from the public in order to help volunteers feel more confident and deliver consistent quality solutions to the county's residents. Please welcome Rebecca.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for asking me to come out here to present Helpline Diagnostics. Oh, is this not on? 1 second. It worked before. I swear I've done PowerPoint presentations before. Here we go. Okay, so thanks for having me out here today. So I was asked to come out to present to all you guys on diagnostics, Master Gardener Diagnostics on Helpline, which I believe the conferences many years ago, and Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, was originally a statewide conference for advanced training to, really, boost everybody up and get everybody up to speed on helpline topics and what's current around the state and horticultural questions coming in from the residents. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of circle back and come back to that. So I have a couple of goals here. So the first goal is obviously just to show you a systematic approach to handling helpline questions. I will be happy if you guys go home and have any increase in confidence in handling those helpline questions when that phone rings or when that email comes in or when that person walks through the door. So just so I get an idea of the audience that I'm looking at here, can you raise your hand if you've been on Helpline for 5 years or more on a regular basis? Okay. Raise your hand, please, if you are an intern that just graduated or have less than 3 years experience on Helpline. Okay, all right. How many people feel like they've lost a little bit of their confidence on Helpline, with Helpline being closed for the last couple of years, or closed, or at least not functioning in the way it had been? Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to reach every one of you. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to interrupt. Okay, so there's the goal in Helpline. Well, first I'm going to assume everybody's had training in Helpline, right? Okay, so the goal of any Master Gardener diagnosis on Helpline is really to be able to distinguish between two general causes of plant problems. I'm going to focus mostly on plants. There's lots of things to focus on with Helpline, but we're going to look at plants. And that would be caused by living agents, right? So your pests and your pathogens. Now, remember, pests can include not only insects, diseases, fungi, bacteria, viruses, but also weeds, okay, or living things. All right, and then non-living things, right? Mechanical damage, physical damage, tractor blight, right? When the tractor runs over the tree. Okay, you're awake. I'm the last speaker before lunch, right? So, okay. So there's tractor blight, believe it or when we love the plant to death and overwater it. Okay, so those non-living agents account for 70 to 90% of the problems that come in on Helpline. And we did crunch those numbers. I have a couple of wonderful volunteers on the Master Gardener Helpline that maintain a database for us to keep track of what our questions are and what nature is coming in so we can prepare ourselves. So 70 to 90% of the problems that come in on Helpline are from non-living agents. All right. So the goal of any diagnosis is to be able to distinguish among the two of them, right? Easy. Talk's over. No. Okay. The complication is that any one symptom can have more than one cause. So Look at this picture here. What do you guys see? What, wilt, right? Is that what I just heard? Yeah, wilt, right, wilt. So the picture in the top is a member of the Cucurbiceae family, right, squash, and the leaves are wilting. And they're wilting, it's the early stages of a disease called bacterial wilt. So it's pretty common in home vegetable gardens, in all sorts of community gardens and so on. So it's spread by an insect vector, right? So there's a spotted or a striped cucumber beetle. They have a proboscis, right? So their mouth part is like a little straw. They fly up and they insert their mouth part into the plant and they suck out the juices, right? Piercing and sucking insect, but they have dirty little mouths. So there's bacteria on it and they transmit this bacteria. So that plant's going to be dead in less than 3 weeks. And there's really nothing as a homeowner you can do about it. The picture in the bottom, let's see, on your left, that is also a member of the Cucurbiceae family experiencing drought symptoms. They look pretty similar, don't they? And then the bottom right, those are pepper plants, and they are wilting, not because of drought, but because of the dreaded fusarium wilt. Right, that whole reason we have to do crop rotation and get those disease-resistant varieties. Right. Okay, so easy, right? Not quite. What else can a plant wilt from? Overwatering, right? And I'm not even touching on being root bound, girdling, and the numerous other causes for a plant to wilt. So it gets a little bit overwhelming when somebody walks up into Helpline or sends in a picture or gives a call and says, you know, why is this not thriving? Why is this not working? I tried to do this vegetable garden and here we are. And we're all human. We want to help. We want to be able to give them an answer right there. Right? But you can't. The best help you can do is dig in, do the research, and see what you can find. Oh. Okay. All right. Hold on. Well, I guess I take PowerPoint off my resume, right? Here we go. All right. So I find that it's best, you know, with anything like this, is to take a systematic approach to diagnostic. What you need to keep in mind is the whole picture. All right. And as it develops, that means you have to have a history of what's going on with the plant and the site condition, not just the one symptom that's being presented in front of you. So it's almost, you have to stop yourself and take a breath and think. And that sometimes is the hardest part. Remember that many symptoms can have more than one cause, right? But not only that, but you're most likely seeing a very small sample of a much larger picture. So you have to try to avoid prejudging the situation. All right, so how many people have seen this come in? And they come in and they put it down and they say, why is my tree dying? And you have one leaf. Worse yet, they say, why is my oak tree dying? What's wrong with my oak? Okay, so it's not clearly, these are maple leaves with a leaf spot on it. So who cares, right? I mean, it's leaf spot. So, I mean, if it's a specimen tree and you're really fastidious and whatnot, there are fungicide recommendations to apply at bud break, and then you repeat it every 7 to 10 days, after 2-inch rain events per label instructions, right? But you have to remember that fungicides prevent fungal spores from germinating. Just like Matt was just talking about earlier, you have to have the pre-emergent down before that crabgrass actually germinates, right? So fungal spores, you have that fungicide has to be already in there. So their maple tree very well may be dying, but that's not the reason. Okay. All right, so here's the 7 steps. Take screenshot. All right, so you have to get an appropriate sample. You have to know your plant or the insect. You have to be able to define the symptoms that you're looking at, whether it's wilt or interveinal chlorosis, which is just a fancy way of saying a yellow leaf with green veins, right? Chlorosis means yellow in between the veins, all right? You have to ask a lot of questions, get to know the history. Try to see it in your mind, all right? You have to examine that sample closely, make a mess. Get out, get out the pocket knife, the pruners, the hand lens. You're going to get dirty. All right. When you make a determination, don't make a determination based on a hunch, not without some solid evidence to that. And then you have to be able to communicate that and offer possible solutions. That's where customer service comes in, right? So first, you have to have an adequate sample. So how many have seen the spider example on the left? Right, so they come in, it's smashed. I'm guilty of that too. I don't know. I mean, I like spiders, but I like to be a distance from the spiders, right? So they smash it, they bring it in, they're like, is it poisonous? I'm like, I don't know. Within the realm of possibility, the probability is likely small for that. All right. I put this picture on the top right up there. Anyone know what that weed is? Thank you. Poison ivy. Okay. And I put that there to remind everybody to put a glove on before they stick their hand in the bag. Right. Okay. The bottom right is a few leaves from a holly tree, and they say their holly tree is dying, but they've brought in just a few leaves that look like they might, have a little bit of lace bug, maybe some winter injury, and that's it. So you need to have at least a larger sample, maybe some photographs of the site, stand 10 feet back and take a picture of the whole plant so we know what's around it, what's going on. Okay, so here's a little cheat sheet for you. So for trees and shrubs, you want to have at least a 6 to 8 inch piece. If there's leaves, flowers, fruit, anything on there that can help aid in identification, always very helpful. All right. For herbaceous plants, the best sample is actually the entire plant. So the example on the bottom right came into our helpline. It was popped out of the pot, planted in the ground, and then it kind of died. They want to know why. From the ground, all we saw was dead stems sticking out. They pulled the whole thing out, and you could see the root ball, the root ball stayed tight together and bound, and only the fibrous roots on the surface, right? So we wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at the above ground parts what happened to that plant. Now, a lot of people were hesitant to bring in the entire plant, and that makes sense. So at least if they can give a couple of stems from the plant, that will be helpful. For turf samples, ask for a 5 inch by 5 inch by 3 inch deep. I mean, they'll have to go and cut a big square, like it's like a Sicilian pizza pie, put it on a tray that they don't use for food, and bring it into Helpline, because you have to be able to see the thatch, right? It's not always grubs. That's the easy one, right? So for disease, if you're suspecting a disease or insect damage, remember that dead leaves, dead plant parts really don't reveal very much. You want to have a healthy part, the dead part, and most importantly is that transition zone in between where any fungus, bacteria, insect is actively moving and growing. So step 2, knowing your plant. Look it up. We'll talk about how in a second. All right, but correct identification is absolutely essential. Many plants And pests have very specific pests and diseases that affect them, right? They're host, that's what we call host specific, right? A rhododendron's not going to get boxwood blight. Okay. And then know what's normal for that plant. What's the appearance that's supposed to look like? Bald cypress, is it deciduous? Right? Okay, so what are the growing conditions that are required? So when you get site history, you can match it up with the growing conditions of that plant. And beware of common names when they bring in a sample. For example, many people all call needled evergreens pine trees, or even like their holiday tree, like their Christmas tree. Right, there's 650 different species, the last I looked, of conifers that it could be, right? So what I find sometimes is if they say pine tree, instead of saying, well, how do you know it's pine tree? Ask them if it's a mugo pine or a red pine or a white pine. And then usually they're like, oh, well, let me bring in a sample and have you help me through that. So that's one way to really, and then you find out it's like a Fraser fir or something else, right? What about apps? This is one of the reasons why I believe the helpline phones are ringing less. One of the reasons. Facebook's another. All right. What about apps? Anyone use apps? Okay, couple of hands. All right. So they are, some of them are a really good resource to get you started. Okay, especially if somebody brings in a plant that you've never seen before, right? Botany is a huge subject in plant taxonomy, and some of those dichotomous keys written by like Gleason and Conquest are like 900 pages wide, right? And so using an app kind of helps narrow it down. There's research studies out of University of Illinois. So iNaturalist on the left-hand side, okay? And we are not endorsing proprietary products, trademarks, or firms. There's a research study out of University of Illinois that found on broadleaf plants, not grasses, on broadleaf plants, identifying down to genus, they found a very high efficacy, about 85 to 90%. If you go down to species, that drops to 30 to 40% accuracy. But it gets you close, right? Especially if you don't even know where to start. Another one that I give out to our new class when they're in training in botany is Dr. Lena Struve, who used to be director of the Chrysler Herbarium. I think she's over at Rutgers Gardens right now. She wrote the common 50 plant families in New Jersey. Sometimes if you could get it into a family, if it's like an umbelliferae, or and that can help you narrow it down real quick. So if you're going to use an app for identification, that's great, but make sure you verify it. Okay, getting down to family and genus is going to save you a lot of time. Then you move into species. And if you can get cultivars, then you're a superstar. Okay, so where you have to be careful with apps though, is that a lot of apps will start telling you that you have diseases, right? So I took these are just a couple of screenshots from some apps, and I took the names off of the apps, but you see the one on the left, it says disease found, right? So you're not even asking for the disease, you just want to know the plant thing, and it'll say, oh, by the way, there is a disease. And they identified that as Phytophthora. That's not what Phytophthora looks like, for example. And then on the left, right, there's another one, disease found. Is it though? Could it just be natural senescence of older leaves, calcium deficiency, maybe change in seasons, maybe some overwatering, right? So we just went through how one symptom can have multiple causes. So, and I find in a lot of cases, it's the diseases are your plant's going to die, you need to rescue it. And here's a product to do that. Okay, so Be careful with the disease apps. I haven't seen actual studies. I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't looked deep enough. But just from what I have found, I don't rely on those, but moving on. So knowing your plant. Hopefully this picture comes out well enough. So these are two different plants at the same time in the same light on the same table with the same pen, right? And they both have similar symptoms. The one on the left and the one on the right are two different plants. The one on the left is branched from an oak tree that has little slits along the top. Anyone want to guess what that is? I don't know if the picture has enough contrast on the slide to be able to see, unfortunately. Ooh, yes, you got it. What county are you from? Mercer County. Good job, Catherine, out there. Cicada damage, right? So the female cicada goes up, she has an ovipositor and she makes little slits along the stem and the new growth lays the eggs in there. What'll happen is that part of the branch will die. Usually the wind then prunes it off or it'll like kind of hang. We call that flagging. And then, but it's not going to kill your tree. It's not going to be a problem. It's basically essentially like getting a bunch of bad heading cuts. It's fine. The one on your right, that's a Henry's walking stick. Okay, so it's supposed to be a little twisted and contorted, right? But it also has similar but different looking slits in there. That's not cicada damage. Henry's walking stick is related to hazelnut. It's filbert, so it's an eastern filbert blight. And that will be a problem on that tree. Okay. So now you have to define the symptoms that you're looking at, right? So color and size, is it normal for that plant? There's some bearded iris leaves in the picture. Is that normal? No, that's not a variegation. There are plants that like hostas have naturally variegated leaves and stuff. That's intentional. Is the shape distorted? Right, so a foliar disease that's pretty common is anthracnose. There's a bunch of different species that make up anthracnose, right? But if you look at maple anthracnose and some of the common ones we see, you can tell it's anthracnose by the wedge shape it takes, and it makes all the leaves kind of bend to the side, like almost like it's got a wound and it's covering, bending over. So is there any dead discolored tissue present to look at that? Is it wilted? Right. Is there tissue missing? Did an insect or a little animal come up and take a bite out of it? Okay, so those detailed observations are necessary. Don't be afraid to cut apart. There should be wood and bark and frass spread around a whole counter when you're looking at the sample. All right, and of course, take the time to look up the plant to determine whether or not it's normal. So in the top left, we get this maybe once a year, every other year, that thinking that there's tip blight. Those are the male cones on a cryptomeria. Totally normal. They're supposed to be there. Whereas on the right-hand side, that's arborvitae and tip blight. And I was talking to our agent from Union County earlier. I asked her, what's the most common helpline question you were getting this year? And arborvitae was one of the ones that came to mind, right? So tip blight on arborvitae. They're deer food in Hunterdon County. So we really don't, the deer eat it before the tip blight gets in. So on the bottom left, you have some spruce gall. So that is not an emerging pine cone. And on the bottom right, that's on a juniper. Anyone want to guess what that is? Excellent. Yep, cedar apple rust. So in the later stages, we recognize it as this orange gelatinous blob with tentacles coming out of it, right? But this is the early stages of it. So it is not a juniper berry. Not that we comment on edible foraging plants. but don't eat it. All right. And it's a lot like playing CSI. You have to ask a lot of questions. So rather than have all of these memorized, what we do in our helpline is we have a list of questions in a plastic stand right next to our telephone. And we can just go through and ask the questions right there. We also have an intake contact sheet. So after you get their contact information, there's all these questions you have to answer. Right. So what's the plant age since transplanting? Why does it matter that it's since transplanting? Because right, transplant shock, right? So transplant shock on larger trees and shrubs can happen a year after they're in the ground. Even more than that, in fact. Soil conditions, soil type, drainage. Where's the stormwater runoff going? Right, get a photo of the site in the area. Cultural practices, ask them how they water, not if they water. Well, that's important too, if they water it or they just let the rain do it. But are they watering at the roots and at the soil, or do they get the leaves all wet thinking that the leaves drink the water? Right, so that's building up a environment for disease infection. Any pest control practices, including weed control. So sometimes people use herbicide along, say, a walkway to keep the weeds down. And if it's hot, there's wind and so on, it can drift onto the nearby plants along the walkway. When was the problem noticed? Of course, they're going to say, we just noticed it, or we got back from vacation. It was probably started over a year ago, but they were away from the house for 7 days and then came back and looked at their yard with fresh eyes. And, so it's always urgent. They need that answer by Friday, even though it's been brewing for a year. How extensive is the damage, right? And that's the case. A good example with that would be with insects. People have different tolerance for insects, right? So some people like one insect is too many. So ask, is it, 1%, 5%, 50% of the plant? Kind of get a picture of, where a threshold would be. Any pattern to the damage, right? So biotic pathogens don't typically go in straight lines and right angles, right? That's usually an abiotic reason. Or if multiple different species of plants, remember lots of pathogens are host specific, right? So if you have lots of different genus and species all with the same symptom, it's probably not a living agent that caused that. Okay. What's the condition of the trunk, stems, and roots? We get this a lot. We get a lot of rhododendron questions, right? And they bring in the leaves or the flowers because that's what they see. You have to have them go back and at least take a picture of some of the stems further in. We'll look at some examples later. Okay, so after you've asked all those questions and then you start researching, and then you probably have to call them back and ask for more information after that, which means you're doing a really good job. Okay, only then can you start to distinguish if whether or not this is being caused by a living or a non-living agent. So here are some examples of things that are caused by living agents, and we'll look at some of these individually. So chewing on the foliage, right? If it looks like an insect or someone took a bite out of a sandwich and you have little teeth marks, right? Like black vine weevil does that on rhododendron, okay? Tunneling inside roots or stems. Someone brings in the white pine and the needles are all dead, and we spend all this time looking at the needles, looking for spores, which there might be spores, but that might not be, there might just be ubiquitous spores that land on dead material. But if you cut the stem open, you'll find black vine weevil larvae. Any swelling, right? So horned oak gall, forsythia gall, there's lots of galls out there. And things that pathogens spread while feeding, like I mentioned, bacterial wilt on cucurbits. So as far as with diseases, you'll see sometimes you'll see abnormal swelling on branches like azalea leaf gall, peach leaf curl, discolored needles. Now be careful with that one. You're laughing. You know where I'm going with this? White pine, right? Yeah, I know. Every year. So white pine, some years are more dramatic than others. And on those more dramatic years, we tend to get more calls, but people start noticing the yellowing of the inner leaves on their white pine, and they call in and swear they've never seen it before. Right. So there is a certain amount of normal needle drop. Yes, some years the colors are brighter. This doesn't seem to be as bright a year so far for white pine, at least in my neck of the woods. All right, so needles dropping. So blisters on the foliage like cedar apple rust. Okay. Growing shoots that are curling. Right, like boxwood sillet will do that, or fire blight on apple and pear. All right, cankers on branches. So I have this picture up there that's an Asian pear tree, right? So the branch was having dieback, and upon closer inspection, you could see that under the bark, it just went a little bit different color, like that the reddish undercolor started turning more of like a dark brown. So just taking a pocket knife and cutting, you can then see in the vascular tissue all the dark brown spotting in there, indicative of a pathogen gunking up the works, right? Because the xylem and phloem. Okay, so here's one example of when Mother Nature does do straight lines and right angles. It's the bottom right. That is a sapsucker woodpecker, and they're going after the sap. And sometimes there's very pretty lattice patterns that they make, right? But it can be discerning. They're not going after insects. It doesn't mean that your tree has borers in it, although it might, but that's not how you would tell. Okay. Let's see, all the way up at the top, that is a buck rub in the fall, right? So the deer rubs its velvety off its antlers, and there you go. On the left, that's arborvitae. That's what a lot of the arborvitae in our county looks like, because the deer eat it from about 6 feet down, so they look like little torpedoes like that. And then the holes in the ground, that's skunk damage. So it's possible that there's a good grub population there, and the skunk is looking for its next meal. So we'll look at a couple of the most common fungi. I'm focusing mostly on needle evergreens and broadleaf evergreens because I wanted to get examples that would be applicable statewide. Okay, so here's Rhizospharia needlecast. Okay, so it can look like the needles have the measles almost, right? So, and in the rain, that fungus will spread to the new growth at bud break, and it will infect the new growth, and then the old needles die and cast off. So what you end up getting is push a button. What you end up getting is bare branches on the inside with tufts of new growth on the outside, and then every year the cycle just repeats. At certain times of the year, it can have a really nice color like that orangey, orangey, sort of purpley color. So that's a Doug fir. All right, and scale, there's lots of scale, all different kinds of scale. So there's tulip tree scale in the top left, right? And then below that is magnolia scale. So I've never met a magnolia that didn't have scale on it, but that's pretty common. And then up on the top right, that's prunicolia scale. So it looks almost like there's lint on the tree, right? And then below that is pine needle scale. So scale is a piercing, sucking insect. And a lot of times you'll get sooty mold. So sooty mold is the ubiquitous environmental fungi that settle on the sugary excrements of these piercing and sucking insects. And a lot of times you'll get ground cover brought in that has sooty mold on it. So then you ask, well, what's above it? All right, spider mites. So on the right side, that's Alberta spruce. So spruce spider mite. And as far as I know, spider mite seems to be the bane of dwarf Alberta spruce problems, but they'll also cause stippling. You'll see the webbing. They like conditions hot and dry. Then the spruce spider mites like it more this time of year when it's cool. So we all know what this is, right? Living pine cones? No. These are bagworm. So you can go around and hand pick them like you're harvesting. Just kind of gross. There are insecticide recommendations to get them at a younger stage, but those insecticide recommendations are much less effective when they're hidden and safe in their cones there. Unfortunately, they do blend in and they do resemble to some extent, at least from far away, pine cones. So a lot of people won't notice that they have this issue until there is significant defoliation. And then pine sawfly. These are fun. Has anyone had these? No? Okay. So well, it's a sawfly, even though they look like a caterpillar, right? And if you disturb them, they all stand up on their little hind legs, like they're standing at attention. And they feed voraciously, and their frass look like little green mini rabbit poops. And I've seen them completely defoliate a dwarf mugo pine in, just a couple of weeks. Every needle, not a thing left. So, all right, here's white pine weevil. This is one of those examples I mentioned earlier when somebody comes in with the sample of the dead pine tip to, instead of just looking at the needles, trying to find what type of needle cast it may have. Get your knife, get your pruners, and cut open, look for that pith and see if you have that larva crawling around in there. They're actually a weevil, not a beetle, right? So a weevil looks like a beetle, but it doesn't fly, overwinters at the base of the tree and crawls its way up. And it has a long snout like Mr. Snuffleupagus, right? All right, and then there's the gallidelgids. There's the eastern spruce and the coulee gallidelgids. That's also by a piercing sucking insect, and they create galls, right? That can kind of look like pineapples a little bit. Well, certainly the coulee, I think, looks more like a pineapple. And at first they're green and fleshy, so they don't really stand out. They're just kind of like swollen tips at the ends of the branches, but then they will turn brown, dry out, and kill off the tips of your branches. Here's white grubs and turf. So if you have white grubs and you have a white grub problem, what's the first thing you do? Right, to see if you have white grubs. If it rolls up like a carpet, because they feed on the roots. Right? And then we have an amazing fact sheet on looking at what tolerance of grubs, what the threshold is before treatment is needed on white grubs. And how about these? Everybody moans. These are old news in Hunterdon County. We've had these for a while. Is anyone having their first year with them? Yeah, there are a few hands out there, right? So, yeah, so they are also, they're leaf hoppers, even though they look like a moth, and they're called spotted lanternfly. And they are piercing and sucking. They're phloem feeders. So their excrement is sugary and sticky, and it makes a mess, and then you get sooty mold, but they will not suck the life out of your trees. So some people are worried about that. Okay. It will attract yellow jackets and other things. So I put these on here to make you all feel better. So things are starting to develop a taste for them, I guess. So we have this praying mantid making eye contact. And the one on the left is a puffball mushroom, and the spotted lanternfly was on it, but it was dead. So I like to think that the mushroom's going after him too. I don't know if that's the case, but all right. So rhododendrons, we get a lot of rhododendron questions. I think not only in Hunterdon County, but all around. So on the top left is a European hornet, and they will strip the bark off the stems in the rhododendron. They are commonly mistaken for murder hornet because they're large. They're not murder hornets or the Asian giant hornet. So they are a problem on rhododendron. People will see them often in their house. I think a lot of people have rhododendrons as foundation plantings. And if you have an open window and, proximity, they can be a problem that way. On the top left, that's the foliar phase of Phytophthora shoot blight, right? So you have a spot. If you look closely, that spot has concentric rings and circles in it. So that's a indicative of pathogen expanding, like tree rings. On the bottom right, I got this from Somerset RCE. Thank you, Rosalind. So you can see that there's some black vine weevil damage, those notching along the leaves. The black vine weevil takes the notches out of the leaves. And then there's the rhododendron borer. So the larva and adult are right there. And they're often causes of dieback. Now, when your rhododendron dies, or when people bring in like a sick rhododendron, again, they're bringing in the crispy brown leaves. You got to be able to look at that stem to get a better picture of what's going on. You can't just necessarily tell by the leaves. Lace bugs, right? So they're very common on, so azaleas and andromedas and such, especially when they're in the sun, right? Because they want to be more in like partial shade, right? So if they're in full sun, they're already a little bit stressed out. The lace bugs are happy there, and you get lace bug infestation. If your client wants to treat for those lace bugs, the problem's just going to keep coming back because that plant is really not in the right place. So that's a fun conversation. All right, and then we have leaf miners. So up at the top, top left is boxwood leaf miner. It's one of my favorite landscape insect pest problems because it's a lot like bubble wrap. So like if you're on the phone, with, grandma or whatever, and you just, you can pop your, so that's a, organic control or cultural control rather for your leaf miner. Okay, so also very common is the columbine leaf miner on the top right. You have leaf miner on holly on the bottom. So they tunnel in the leaves. Okay. Boxwood cillet, that's a piercing sucking insect, and they cause that classic cupping of those boxwood leaves on the new growing tips. And then there's that boxwood blight. So that's a common question that comes in. Do I have boxwood blight? And it could be a number of things. So first, what I tell people, if I'm seeing things like these lesions on the stems, you see those little black streaks there, those little lesions. If I'm seeing that and the leaves are falling off, go to the plant diagnostic lab and get that tested for confirmation. Right. So if it's boxwood blight, it's going to defoliate and your boxwood's going to die. And you can't stop it. Really, once it's in there. And then there's this Volutella blight, which boxwood, they're finicky. So they'll get winter injury and stressed, or they're overwatered, or they're underwatered, or they're too hot, or they don't like their mulch, right? And the branches start to die and the leaves stay yellow and they stay attached. Okay, and then there's canker that can move in, which Volutella is a genus of it. You can go to plant diagnostic lab, but one of the things the master gardeners can do in the helpline very easily is to take a Ziploc bag, put it in there with a moist paper towel and let it sit for 3 days. And you get these orange or salmon colored spores that will come out, which means that it has a Volutella blight. So there is a spray recommendation for it, but if they do the sterile pruning and take good horticultural care, hopefully it'll grow out of it, but maybe not. Never any guarantees. All right. So we talked all about some of the most common examples of plant problems that are caused by living agents. Now we're going to go through some of the most common that are caused by non-living agents. Okay, so those would include extreme weather, right? Flooding, severe wind, hail, right? All that type of thing. Salt. So in the picture here is actually road spray from de-icing salts along those trees, right? Toxic chemicals, right? That sounds extreme, but yeah, chemicals can cause it. Pesticide drift, for example, can cause it. Excessive amounts of fertilizer can cause problems, or excessive amounts of lime, like the people that lime their lawn twice a year, every year, over and over until their pH is out of whack. Any nearby construction can cause problems. Right. So one thing to keep in mind is that the injuries that are caused by these factors, they don't necessarily spread. Right. They will affect different species of plants, where you'll see similar symptoms along those different species. And if the damage isn't too terrible, it'll grow out of it. Here's a couple of examples. Picture on the left, that's here in campus. That is soil compaction, right? So there's a sidewalk that goes around, but all the pedestrians cut that corner and walk on that, and you have that. And then on the right, there's compaction for a different reason. So if you look closely, you can see some tree roots, some surface roots in that area. So the grass really isn't able to grow with probably the shade, the roots, and how dense that clay soil is packed down. And here's some salt damage along a walkway on creeping juniper. How about this one? Blossom end rot, right? It's not a disease caused by a living agent. It's a physiological disorder caused by a calcium deficiency due to an interruption in the transpiration stream while the fruit is growing. So when you went on vacation and you had your friend water your garden while you were gone, and then in August you had blossom end rot, you know, they skipped a day. All right. So these are roses. So sometimes it's difficult to tell. So basically the description here is that it's elongated growth, it's twisted, and it has like numerous thorns and so on. So on the left, it's actually a glyphosate injury. Glyphosate, that's the active ingredient in systemic herbicide, sometimes marketed as Roundup, right? And there's other products as well. So herbicide drift can cause that type of injury. On the right, on the picture on the upper right, that's rose rosette disease. So they started out thinking it was a mycoplasma. I think they've settled on it being a virus transmitted by the ureaphoid mite. Okay. So yeah, it's nasty. So it started on the multiflora rose. It's jumped over to cultivated roses. You can try to stay on top of it by pruning it out, but eventually the whole plant's gonna die, and you're gonna have to remove it, roots and all. right? So difference between the two, sometimes you have to just wait and see. If it's simple glyphosate injury and otherwise healthy rose will grow out of it. If it's rose rosette, it will not grow out of it. How about here? You guys see a problem coming? Yes, the downspout. This is an example of why you want a picture of the area, not just the plant with the symptom, right? So all that stormwater runoff is coming right down the gutters and into those plants. So they may want to put an extension and get it out of the planting area, or they could put a rain barrel or a rain garden and other things. Okay, so your diagnostic steps. If you suspect that it's a living agent, right? So one of the quick ways to, sort of like a quick cheat, is to go to the Rutgers pesticide recommendations for home landscapes, right? And look up your plant. Let's say it's like boxwood, for example, and it will list the 4 or 5 most common living agents that affect that plant. And that's a quick way to narrow it down. Right, and if you suspect a non-living agent, get more information about the growing practices, transplanting, find out the growth requirements for that plant. All right, so when you're doing the diagnosis, here's some golden rules that we live by. Please do not guess or assume a diagnosis without solid evidence. Remember, we do have a plant diagnostic lab, right? So you got as far as you could to see if you could figure it out. If you can't, then they got to go to the plant diagnostic lab. Okay, don't guess. There are things they can do in the lab that we cannot do. Many things they could do in a lab that we cannot do on a Master Gardener Helpline. All right, take your time. Don't feel rushed because the person is standing there. And oftentimes they'll say, no, I'll wait. And say, all right, I find the biggest book I can and I sit down and start looking at it. And they're like, here's my cell phone. I'll come back. So, don't be rushed because you really got to take your time to figure these out. Sometimes the best we can do is come out with a probable cause, right? Or just rule out worst case scenarios. Sometimes we cannot give them a definitive answer, and that is okay. Right? When you're making a recommendation, provide the client with as much information as you can, depending on whatever your diagnosis comes out to be. For non-living causes, there may not be a recommendation. So it might be just it's not in the right place. So, you can watch it die slowly over a period of time until you decide to replace it. And of course, with pesticide recommendations, make sure you're using your Rutgers University and JAES recommendations, which your coordinator no doubt has it in a brightly labeled area with like arrows pointing at it. Okay. Here's an example on that cheat sheet looking at the pest management guidelines. So there's an example for boxwood, and there you can see there's canker, psylla, spider mite recommendations for boxwood. So it's kind of a quick cheat to be able to figure out what some of the possible solutions are. They might not be listed on it. Very often they're not, in which case the client could go to their local garden supply center and find a product that's appropriately labeled for both the plant and the pest. Right? So here's your gardening fact sheets. Remember the publications website? Right? Bookmarked on the computer there, the plant diagnostic lab. Okay, so when you're making recommendations, keep in mind also that it is probably best not to provide a prognosis of what's going to happen. My crystal ball never works with that, so I can't tell the future. I mean, unless it's dead, then, there's really nothing they can do about it. I bet that that's not going to come back. And then for some problems like a mature tree, especially, you want to make sure that they can get talk them about how to hire a licensed tree care professional that can come out on site, because we don't do site evaluations. They can come out on site and evaluate the area, the overall health of the tree. It's a lot more complicated than, a couple of leaves that they bring in, unless it's like horned oak gall that you can kind of see right away. Some things are definitive, but otherwise a general decline, if they're noticing crown dieback, remember, certified tree care professional. All right. And then of course, there's the topics that we don't handle on Helpline, but we never say, no, out of scope and hang up the phone, right? So commercial questions, commercial agriculture questions, those are going to go to your coordinator and or county agricultural agent. We don't make any determinations on medicinal plants, right? Or foraging, right? They can go to their physician, county health department, poison control, their veterinarian, if they're calling for their pet. All right, public health questions. We're lucky in Hunterdon County because all the bed bug questions go straight to the health department. We don't have to do the bed bug questions. Yeah. Let's see, mushrooms and molds. We don't handle mushrooms and molds. We don't train you in mycology, right? A misidentification is very easy and the consequences can be extremely severe. Let's see, wildlife beyond those related to gardening. There's the Department of Environmental Protection. There's Fish, Game and Wildlife, the NRCS, to guide people that way. Transportation of plants, that's very important, right? That's how we have things, so-and-so, like a relative in a different country might have this really cool plant and you bring it back and start growing it, and that's why we have a lot of the plant problems that we have today, right? It's usually with good intentions, but so New Jersey Department of Agriculture handles those. Burn permits will go to your agents. Beekeeping, their local chapter of Northwest, or in our case, it's the Northwest, but the New Jersey Beekeepers Association. And ponds, not the little water feature in the garden kind of pond, but big real ponds, we send over to the NRCS. Okay, any other? Yeah. So I have a bunch of photo credits on here. The slides will probably be made available at some point. All of those links are active, and pretty much all of them lead to common fact sheets that, at least in Hunterdon County, that we have on our helpline. So a lot of the photos have come from all of those, so you can familiarize yourself with those different resources. Everyone's really quiet. Yeah. Yeah, I think you get the whole recording sent to you. Yeah. Everyone's really quiet. Is everyone feeling more confident about being on Helpline? Please tell me I've succeeded a little bit here. Is there a question over there? For pasture, depending on the animal, really, that will go through the agents. Through your county agents, yeah, because it's usually a weed in the pasture, but they're concerned about it because of their horse or, something like that. We don't do things with heartbeats. No, plants stay put. Yeah. Everyone wants to go home for lunch, right?
A comment to make on the plant diagnostic lab, because the helplines are collecting or accepting digital photos to assist clients with diagnosis, but the plant diagnostic lab does not accept digital photos for any diagnostic work. If you're referring a resident there, then they have to submit a sample and fill out the proper form and sign up for the proper tests. Well, that's a soils lab, but they need a live sample or a dead sample, but they will not diagnose anything from a digital photograph. Even if it's a high quality, really good photograph, doesn't matter. They need a sample. So some homeowners shy away from that because now I have to figure out how to take the sample, either drop it off there or mail it. And of course, if the mail shows up on Friday, it sits until Monday. It may degrade so we try to, hopefully you do as well, encourage people to mail early in the week or mail it on Saturday so it shows up on Monday or Tuesday. So it's a fresher or as fresh a sample as possible, and follow the instructions on their website for submitting a sample. But they will not do anything with a photo, even if an agent sends them a photo. They want a sample.
Yeah, question?
I know how to access the fact sheets online, but you had a couple of pictures of something that looked like more brochure-like. I'm not sure how to refer to it, what to call it. Are those available online? You'd
You
have
mean
to
The
flip.
brochure, like the pest man, yes, that is available online.
Okay, because I don't know where those are.
Okay, so you see the picture on the right? So it's our Rutgers publication, so it's
Okay,
NJ,
sheets and bulletins. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm referring to
yeah.
the bulletin then.
right? And then if you want to get that in particular, you can put in, what's the number on that? Well, you can put in pest management for trees, shrubs, and flowers on home grounds. And it's bulletin number E014, I believe.
If you go back to the last slide. So in that search, oh, no.
Whoops, there we
too
go.
far. There we go. In that search box, you can put in anything. Well, I'm not going to say anything because sometimes searches come up 0. But if you put in, if you know the publication number, if you know the author, if you have a couple of keywords, the document that Rebecca's sharing is a little dated. That's what Matt was referring to earlier, that it could have older chemistries in there or not have the newer chemistries included. And it is active ingredients. It's not trade names. So people are not going to know, or maybe they do know what glyphosate is by this time, but maybe not because they're on the way to a big box store to buy whatever they need. Yes. So that's included in there because it's cultural practices as well as pest control recommendations. Yeah.
We have a great fact sheet on pruning, flowering shrubs. So if you just put pruning in there, hit the search button, maybe more than one will pop up based on the keyword.
Any other questions from the audience or online? Wow.
I didn't hear it.
The question was, when or how can there be an accessible database of helpline data from all over the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of issues when it comes to privacy with doing that sort of thing. So for Hunterdon County residents, we're trying to restrict everything to just township, question, what the sample we had that came in, and then, what solutions or advice that we provided on that. But every county is a little bit different in what they're looking at and what they're looking for. But there might be some privacy issues with some of the stuff. So that's above my pay grade. Nick, I'll throw that to you.
I think it's an excellent, we'd have to work out the details. But just like we all use Better Impact, there may be a way to gather all the information of common pests, common questions, common solutions, if you will, or at least cultural practices, et cetera, so that we can all learn from each other as well, and then see where the link is, let's say for that document or whatever, or from the state perspective, just like we were asked recently about drought losses for growers, we could talk about activity of rhododendron, diseases or insect issues or whatever across the state. So that it's an interesting project that maybe a good student programmer could work on, but good suggestion. Anything else from online? No? Where is this lab? Not far from here.
Yeah,
If you go down Riders Lane and go over the top of Route 1 and make your left into Rutgers Gardens, make a right. Don't go left into Rutgers Gardens, make a right. And that will take you eventually to the Geiger building where the diagnostic lab is located. It's Riders Lane. Is it East Brunswick or North Brunswick?
Milltown, I thought.
Milltown?
Yeah, I think it was Milltown.
Milltown? Sorry? If you make a right when you first go in, you'll pass the farmer's market on your left and then you go up the hill. There's no greenhouses on that side, no. There's greenhouses down further by the Holly House. That when you come down the hill from Riders Lane, it comes to a T. That's the Holly House on your right, and there's greenhouses there. I'm saying to make the right as soon as you come in off of Riders Lane. Don't make a left into Rutgers Gardens Gate. Make a right. And some Master Gardener classes in the past would have tours of the diagnostic lab. I think Essex County came down a couple times, maybe Union. So it's something it's not, it's about a 10-minute tour, to be honest with you. But it's where Rich Buckley and Sabrina Turpak, you may have heard those names before. They do a lot of the diagnostic work right there, and their students sometimes. That is not where they get the soil samples.
Good question.
The soil samples are right over here by Houlihan's and on the border in the administrative.
It's over by.
Well, you need a landmark, right? And it's lunchtime, so I'm using food as a landmark. But the Rutgers Administrative Services Building, which is right off of Route 1, before you get to Riders Lane, if you're coming south on Route 1, is a right-hand turn, and on the left side of that building is a soils lab. And they accept soils testing there. Either you could drop it off in person, or you have those mailers that you still use in the county offices. And now the diagnostic lab is saying that they get more samples with Ziploc bags and bigger envelopes, which is fine. They don't have to use those mailers that they designed so many years ago that we still have. And no one can figure out how to mail them, so it's get a bigger envelope at Staples or wherever and, stick your Ziploc bag in there and submit your sample accordingly. But yeah, that 2 different locations. Good question. There is a cost for both diagnostic labs. There's the basic tests that we all give away or sell at the county offices, which is about $20 for that. That gives you your basic soils tests. But if you want to test for certain metals, certain salts, certain other issues, there's a whole menu of prices that people would then send that money with their sample to the diagnostic lab. With the plant diagnostic lab, there are also a fee structure based on what you're testing for, whether it's golf course submitting cup cuts to test for the turf grass diseases and insects, and then also homeowners as well. So there's a whole menu for people to check off for what tests they want. And there's a price accordingly. Yes. Any other questions? If not, I want to thank Rebecca for a great presentation.